The signal came from the empty black space between stars. It moved through the void for 80,000 years. It passed dead worlds and dying suns. It crossed the arms of the galaxy like a whisper no one could hear. Every advanced civilization that existed during those long years had their listening stations pointed at the sky. But none of them understood. None of them cared enough to answer. The Empire heard it first. Their scientists studied the strange pattern for 300 years. They called it background noise. They filed it away in their ancient databases and forgot about it. The signal was too simple, they said, too primitive. No advanced species would send something so basic. The collective picked it up 2,000 years later. Their artificial minds processed it in seconds. They recognized it as artificial. They knew something had made it on purpose, but they did not believe in answering unknown signals. Their protocols were clear. Unknown transmissions meant unknown danger. They blocked the frequency and moved on with their endless calculations. The hive heard the signal next. Their queens debated for 50 years about what to do. In the end, they decided the signal came from too far away. Whatever sent it was probably dead by now. Why waste resources on ghosts? They had wars to fight and worlds to consume. They had no time for ancient mysteries. 12 more civilizations encountered the signal over the following. Some studied it briefly. Some ignored it completely. A few tried to trace its origin but gave up when they realized how far they would need to travel. The journey would take thousands of years, even at faster than light speeds. No species wanted to commit to such a voyage for something so uncertain. The signal kept traveling. It grew weaker with each passing century. Soon it would fade into nothing. Soon whatever message it carried would be lost forever. The galaxy had heard the call. The galaxy had chosen not to answer. Then humanity found it. Dr. Sarah was working the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station in Antarctica when her equipment detected the anomaly. She was tired. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. She almost dismissed the reading as interference from a passing satellite. But something made her look closer. Something made her run the analysis one more time. The pattern was mathematical. It repeated in sequences that nature could not produce. Sarah felt her heart beat faster as she stared at the screen. This was not random noise. This was not a pulsar or a quasar or any natural phenomenon she had ever seen. This was a message. Someone out there had sent a message, and after 80,000 years of silence, it had finally reached Earth. Sarah called her supervisor. Her supervisor called the director. The director called the government. Within 6 hours, every major space agency on Earth knew about the signal. Within 12 hours, the news had leaked to the public. Within 24 hours, the whole world was watching. The message was simple. That was the first thing the linguists and mathematicians noticed. It used basic mathematics as a foundation, prime numbers, geometric shapes, universal constants that any intelligent species would recognize. Whoever sent this signal wanted to be understood. They wanted anyone who heard it to know they were not alone. But there was more. Beneath the mathematical foundation was something else, coordinates, a location in space where the senders had lived, and a date, a timestamp that showed when the message was first transmitted, 80,000 years ago, long before humans had learned to make fire, long before the first cities rose from the mud of ancient rivers. The world governments held emergency meetings. Scientists argued about what to do. Some said humanity should respond immediately. Others warned that answering unknown signals was dangerous. What if the senders were hostile? What if they were waiting for someone to respond so they could find new worlds to conquer? The debates lasted for months. Politicians gave speeches. Religious leaders offered prayers. Philosophers wrote essays about the meaning of contact with alien life. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a theory, but no one could agree on what humanity should actually do. Then a young astronomer named James Park made a discovery that changed everything. James had been studying the coordinates embedded in the signal. He had been tracking the location through space and time, accounting for the movement of stars and the expansion of the universe. When he finished his calculations, he went pale. He checked his numbers 3 times. Then he checked them again. The signal had not come from some distant corner of the galaxy. It had come from a star system only 200 light-years away, and the species that sent it had not disappeared. They had not gone extinct. They had been waiting. They had been listening for a response for 80,000 years. James published his findings. The scientific community erupted. 200 light-years was nothing in cosmic terms. A ship traveling at near light speed could make the journey in a few centuries. Humanity could actually reach these beings. Humanity could actually meet them face to face. The United Nations voted. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would respond to the signal. Humanity would answer the call that every other civilization in the galaxy had ignored. The response took 5 years to prepare. Scientists worked with artists and musicians to create a message that would represent all of humanity. They included mathematics and science. They included images and sounds. They included recordings of human languages and samples of human music. They wanted the receivers to understand who humans were. They wanted them to know that Earth had heard their call and chosen to answer. The message was transmitted from a dozen stations around the world. It was aimed at the coordinates James had calculated. It would take 200 years to arrive. 200 years for the senders to receive proof that someone had finally listened. But humanity did not stop there. The space agencies of the world came together for the first time in history. They pooled their resources and their knowledge. They began building something that had never been built before, a ship that could travel between the stars, a vessel that would carry human representatives to meet the beings who had sent the signal so long ago. The project took 50 years. Entire generations dedicated their lives to its completion. Engineers solved problems that had seemed impossible. Scientists made breakthroughs that pushed the boundaries of physics. Millions of people worked on the ship in some capacity. It became a symbol of human unity. It became proof that humanity could achieve anything when they worked together. They named the ship Messenger. The crew was selected from volunteers around the world. They knew they would never return to Earth. They knew they would spend their entire lives aboard the ship, and their children would continue the journey after them. They accepted this sacrifice willingly. They understood that some things were more important than individual lives. The messenger launched from orbit on a clear summer morning. Billions of people watched as the ship's engines ignited and it began its long journey into the darkness between stars. Many of those watching wept. They knew they would never see the ship arrive. They knew they would never know if the mission succeeded. But they watched anyway. They watched because they understood that this moment belonged to all of humanity. The messenger traveled through space for 212 years. 6 generations lived and died aboard the ship. Each generation taught the next about their mission. Each generation prepared the next for the moment of contact. When the ship finally approached its destination, the great of the original crew stood ready to represent their species. The aliens were waiting for them. They called themselves They were ancient beyond human comprehension. Their civilization had risen and fallen and risen again countless times over millions of years. They had sent their signal during a golden age of exploration. They had wanted to find others like themselves. They had wanted to know they were not alone in the universe. For 80,000 years they had waited. For 80,000 years they had hoped someone would answer. Countless civilizations had heard their call. All of them had chosen to ignore it. All of them had decided that the effort was too great, the distance too far, the risk too high. Then humanity arrived. They could not understand it at first. They had studied the galaxy for millions of years. They knew how other species thought. They knew that most civilizations grew cautious and fearful as they aged. They knew that most species eventually stopped looking outward and turned inward instead. But humans were different. Humans had only existed for a fraction of the time they had been waiting. They were young and impulsive and reckless by galactic standards. They made decisions based on emotion as much as logic. They took risks that older species would never consider. And they answered signals that everyone else ignored. The meeting between humans and lasted for months. The two species learned each other's languages and customs. They shared their histories and their dreams. They had knowledge that could advance human civilization by thousands of years. They offered it freely as a gift of gratitude. But the humans surprised them again. The human representatives did not just want knowledge. They wanted partnership. They wanted to work alongside to explore the galaxy together. They wanted to find other signals that had been ignored. They wanted to answer other calls that had gone unanswered. They had never considered this possibility. They had always thought of contact as an endpoint, find others, share knowledge, return to solitude. That was how it had always worked. That was how every other civilization operated. Humanity showed them another way. Word spread through the galaxy about what the humans had done. Other species heard about the young race that had answered the ancient signal. They heard about the ship that had traveled for 200 years to shake hands with strangers. They heard about the partnership that was forming between old and young. For the first time in millions of years, the galaxy began to change. Other civilizations started reviewing their ignored signals. They started reconsidering the calls they had chosen not to answer. They started wondering what they might have missed. They started wondering what humanity had understood that they had not. The Empire sent a message to the coordinates they had ignored 300 years before. The Hive dispatched a ship to investigate the signal they had dismissed as worthless. Even the collective, those cold artificial minds, began questioning their protocols about unknown transmissions. Humanity had not just answered one signal. Humanity had reminded the entire galaxy what it meant to reach out. Humanity had shown them that the darkness between stars was not something to fear. It was something to explore. The elder who had led the first contact delegation made a statement that was translated into every known language in the galaxy. He said that for 80,000 years his people had wondered if anyone would ever answer their call. He said they had almost given up hope. He said they had almost stopped listening. Then he said something that would be remembered for as long as civilizations existed. He said that of all the species in the galaxy, only the youngest and had possessed the courage to respond. He said that the humans had not answered because they were the strongest. They had answered because they believed that no voice should go unheard. They had answered because they refused to let any call for connection fade into silence. He said that if this was what it meant to be human, then perhaps the galaxy had much to learn from them. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, another ancient signal continued its journey. It had been traveling for 100,000 years. It had passed a dozen civilizations without being answered. It was growing weaker with each passing century. But now humanity was listening. And this time, the signal would not go unanswered.